Hi, Ron, and your fishies.
Hello, Steve. How are you?
I'm good. I love that class we just had.
It's good. I hope she does the Old Testament. So I like to do that with her.
Yeah, because there's a lot more going on in the Old Testament. I mean, I
Oh,
think
it's a lot.
basically,
It's like three times as big.
yeah, and like we all pretty much know the basics of the New Testament, but um, the Old Testament, what I found it very difficult.
I like the Old Testament.
You're gonna like it, especially when you get to the prophets.
Hmm.
And my favorite was Amos. He was a minor prophet, and he was like very diaconal to me. When you get a chance to read Amos, kind of zoom through him. He was just this guy who cut sycamores, and in Israel, the sycamores could be eaten. They were eaten in place of figs by the poor. And he
Mm.
got sick of watching everybody getting fat on all this good fruit, and he marched up to northern Israel and started a ruckus and
Oh,
he,
rockets.
a ruckus. He was very, very diaconal in his ruckusing.
Oh, ruckus.
I'm trying to use nice words.
A kerfuffle.
A kerfuffle. Kerfuffle.
Well, we are in the Old Testament at that point.
Yeah.
Kerfuffle would probably be appropriate.
Oy vey, it's Amos again.
Exactly.
Uh yeah, there's all kinds of stuff going. I mean, I was just looking at some of my Old Testament notes. I was like, wow. I can't believe what is this? This is Psalms, I think, here.
Hi, Harry.
Hey,
How are you guys?
Good,
good.
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 The heck?
Harry, are you going for priesthood?
Yep. That's the plan. Yeah, I'm a postulant.
Now, does this count as your seminary work?
No, 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 no. I've been to seminary as a Lutheran,
Okay.
but I need to get tuned up with Episcopal worship and liturgy. Put it that
Got
way.
it. Got it. And
Cool.
How about you?
where do you go to seminary at?
Gettysburg, Lutheran Theological Seminary, Gettysburg. Yeah.
Mhm.
How about
We're
you?
Sue and I are both going for the diaconate, so we don't have to go to seminary
Okay.
per se.
huh,
So, I mean, this is kind of like seminary style. So
Oh, please. Yes, very much so. Yeah.
I wasn't sure if you guys were able to use these credits towards the priesthood, or did you
No,
still, no, you
I
still
have enough. I have enough credits. I came into ministry as what they call Lutheran diaconal minister. Years ago in 1997, they created that ministry. They didn't have deacons, and that ran up until 2017. And then somehow, in their wisdom, poof, we all became deacons.
so
So
right now you're considered a deacon?
I am a deacon, yeah. And I had a reception of holy orders last April, and I've been in an Episcopal church, I guess, for over 10 years. I was in a Lutheran church. They asked me to pastor it about 12 years ago, I guess, and I declined. So someone else came in, and I had to find another church, and the only one in my area was Episcopal, and I kind of fell in love with that. And it was a non-issue until I retired. I was a hospice chaplain for a long time and a hospice director. And in retirement, they encouraged me to think about becoming a priest. So I did, and it's been a journey. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
yeah,
So
because
Always a journey.
this
yes.
school seems to have a 4-year priest program for bivocational priests. I've never heard of this before. I was reading about it.
Depends on the diocese, I think. Depends on the bishop more specifically.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, and their needs. Obviously, every diocese has different sort of
right.
needs. So
What's your diocese?
yeah, Delaware.
Delaware. Okay.
Were you guys able to do the paper? I sent her a copy, said I want a copy of the paper. I haven't heard back.
She wrote back to me that she received it. I also posted it on the discussion page. I don't know if you guys.
I
So-
didn't do that.
I didn't see it.
I
No.
did too, but I don't know if mine actually posted to the discussion page or just under. Cause
Yeah,
I don't,
yeah, like a discussion topic or something. It wasn't in the normal discussion page and I don't
yeah,
know, I don't know
yeah,
how.
I did the same thing though.
I'm sorry, was there a discussion?
No,
No, we had that paper to write.
The what?
the liturgical
Oh,
paper,
the, oh yeah, the bulletin more or less, right?
the bulletin. Like that.
Yeah.
Mine's, mine's all.
Tim,
writ-
where are you going to seminary?
I don't know, well, Stevenson School for right now.
Now,
Uh,
how does this work for you in that?
So as of right now, I'm kind of at a point where my daily life won't let me, I can't drop my daily life and move on. So I'm doing some things to move ahead and I don't know, potentially go to seminary and looking at Virginia as a possibility.
Virginia, okay. Now, what does Stevenson offer you for the seminary? Do you get credits for this? Apply to
I don't
seminary?
know what will transfer and what won't.
Okay.
If that's the case at this point, but I guess our diocese is using Stevenson School as kind of a local formation thing
Okay,
and as a continuing education thing.
right.
So I'm trying to pick and choose things that either I feel like I need additional work on or things that fit my schedule.
Yeah.
That's the other piece of it. So
I get it. Okay.
that's kind of where I am at the moment.
You know, it's interesting because seminary, the way it is now, the 3-year residential program was really, back in the day, was designed for single young men.
Right.
And that's just not the way it is anymore. And if you look at all the seminaries in this country right now, there are only a couple that are really Virginia and Seminary of the Southwest
Awesome.
are, yeah, in Austin are doing the residential thing. And it's evolving. And that's why the Stevenson School is so good for people who can't take 3 years off to go, you know, move away and move their families if they have to.
And seminary,
I'm kind of waiting for my children to finish high school and
That's
then
right.
I can kind of pull the record and do some other things.
Seminary of the Southwest also is who ran the Iona platform
Yes.
originally.
Right.
They have, hey, I have clear glasses too. I just
Oh.
don't put them on. I love the clear frames.
Me too. Me too.
You don't see anything around you. It's nice.
Well, it's great to see you all.
Good to see you.
See you.
We're missing
One.
folks, I think. We have 7. 1, 2, 3, 5. Patrick's not here, and who am I?
Didn't Ann retire?
Anne is not in here, so that gave us 7.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, someone will join or they won't. I haven't heard from Patrick that he won't be joining. So, Tim, were you leading us in prayer tonight?
I did
Somebody's
last
leading
week.
us in prayer.
I had led last week, but
Oh, who was doing prayer this week?
I can do it if you want.
All right, go for it.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this gathering of people who want to serve you and your holy people. Open our minds, open our hearts, purify our souls, and let us hear only what comes from your goodness. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Nice.
Well done. Well done. Oh, you pray very well, extemporaneously.
Thank you.
Funny memory that comes up for me. I grew up, you know, in the 50s and 60s. And back in those days, we had an assembly every week. And at that assembly, there was a Bible reading and a prayer. And which sounds really weird in today's world. And so it came to be my turn to do this. And I was just mortified. I thought, what am I going to do? And my mother said, well, here is the book, the Prayer for Grace from the Book of Common Prayer. And I said, oh, no, no, no. Everybody else just gets up and says, what we call We Just Jesus prayers. And she said, you're not doing that. You're not doing that. You're going to read this prayer. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be the laughing stock of the whole school reading a prayer, because most everybody, the little Episcopal church there was so tiny. But whenever I hear anybody get up and pray extemporaneously, I always remember that. And I always, every time I've done morning prayer, when we get to the prayer for grace, particularly in Rite 1, I think of my mother and smile. So
It was a good idea she had, though.
that's right. That's right. At the time, I was a trashy, middle schooler or teenager or something, and just was mortified by the whole thing. So anyway. So before we get started on talking about the Eucharist, any thoughts about the Easter Vigil that came up? Any questions? Any thoughts that you had about it?
About the upcoming, like what?
About the service itself.
I comments that they're, depending on which church you go to, they're all very different, and I guess that's whoever puts the bulletin together, as we're giggling about the bulletins that we just wrote. Yeah, I mean, the Easter Vigil has got to be the one thing about it. Whoever writes it, it has to be holy. It has to be quiet, and then there should be that cacophony of hooray, at that point, because I just think that's the best part when, the lights come up. And
Yes,
I think I was somewhere where we had noisemakers.
that would be fine.
And I forget where that was. It might have been at our cathedral, but I think it was like those spinning things.
Yeah,
Like, yay, Jesus, yeah, he's risen.
right. Anybody else? Anything?
I think it's something I would like to try. I think as I enter the priesthood, I mean, I don't want to go in there and say, hi, I'm the new guy, I'm going to change everything. I think in the next several years, especially with a little fire pit, I kind of like that. I think that'd be intriguing to do, and to put, I think we discussed it. I get so mixed up. I have so many people mentoring, putting our concerns and worries into that fire pit. Someone mentioned that, I think, here, and I think that was a wonderful idea. No, I think it'd have a lot of meaning. I think it just doesn't become blasé. I think in the church, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be serving, they don't seem to do too many innovative things. And I think clearly as a new priest, I want to do everything new, but cautious. And I'm going to establish 2 goals for the year, and they're minor goals, but we'll see what God has in mind.
Our rector set the front of our church on fire with a fire pit one year, so you have to be careful.
I
He
could
didn't
have a
mean
short
it,
career.
but yeah, no. The weird thing is I was an usher for that service, and I just happened to look out the door and I saw this fire creeping up the wall.
Oh no,
And I
real
grabbed the
fire.
fire extinguisher, and you got to be
That's-
careful with the little fire pit. Make sure it's away
Oh
from.
no, absolutely. I won't put it in the middle of the sanctuary. No.
Yeah,
if you can do it outside someplace.
That's what I'm-
this was outside, and that whatever was growing a little bit on the side, just a little bit of weeds on the side of the building caught on fire.
Must have been windy, as it
Yep.
always is.
It often is on Easter, at the Easter Vigil, yeah.
I had
Oh,
a
yeah.
friend that had, I don't know if I should share this. She put a chocolate fountain in place of the baptismal font on Easter morning, so that
Oh.
nothing says he is risen like a chocolate fountain. I don't know, but
Oh, okay. Maybe
I
at
don't
the
know about that.
reception after the Easter Vigil is a
maybe. I don't think
better
I'm
use
that
for that
bold.
chocolate fountain.
Not
could
not in the
I-
font.
I think that'd be a practice looking for a theology. No, but no. So,
For sure. For sure. Well,
Well,
yeah.
when I left when I left this class last week, I was feeling pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? I've never experienced an Easter vigil. And
Hmm.
so listening to you explain it, I really felt like I was left out, you know? And so I think I've shared with you guys before that we just recently got a new priest. We haven't had a priest for many, many, many years. And so we've had supply. So we've not done a lot of the traditional services over the years. And so one of the things that our new priest, when he first came, had said was that we have a nice yard. So the rectory is next to the church, and there's a really nice yard that goes along with it. And he was talking about putting a fire pit out there. So we've been doing these Wednesday night Lenten Bible studies with the soup dinner up at the church. And so when I went to the dinner last Wednesday, I said to him, you know how we're talking about that fire pit? I said, well, I just learned all about the Easter Vigil and how, extravagant it is supposed to be. And I've never experienced one. And so he promised me next year we are going to have this big, extravagant, the whole, shebang. So I might
Wonderful.
experience my first Easter Vigil. But yeah, I was feeling pretty left out after last week.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, if you notice, I put it on the website, I put the file that we talked about last week about designing your Easter Vigil and how it can be done without having, a huge choir. You don't need a lot of people. You just need to plan it very carefully. And that's the main thing.
Well, our church is really small. So there are literally 9 of us, and 6 of those would be my whole family. So it's me,
Well,
my husband,
you
and
can
my
do it.
4 kids. We have no organist.
Fine.
Our music comes from the internet, so so my husband downloads the music for the hymns, and then we do our best at singing.
You have to do what you can do at your place. So, great. And so I did put a discussion topic up. It'll come live at 8 o'clock, which leads me in, which what Harry was saying is a perfect lead in. I want you to tell me how, if you became the rector of a parish who had never done an Easter vigil, how you would teach this. What would you do? How would you go about teaching that this is something worth doing? And I'd love,
Yes.
because this is a discussion topic, I'd love for you all to back and forth a little bit, not just, you don't have to just write, but if someone says something that you think, oh, well, that's a good idea, that makes me rethink something. But, give you a couple of weeks. Of course, we are not meeting next Tuesday because it's Holy Week. And so when we meet again, if you can just put in that. I've gotten assignments from Ron and Tim and Sue. So
I actually had a question about that.
sure.
Did you want us to email you the assignment? Because I attached it to on the assignments.
Oh, okay. Then I'll look for it there. Yeah, an email. If you could email the Word document to me.
Okay, I'll do that then, because
And
last
I
night
could
I attached
insert
it.
some comments that way, which I've done. I've read the 3 that I have, and I've put some comments in. And for those of you who haven't turned it in yet, I want you to do this like you're in charge. Don't just tell me what your parish does. Whether it's Maundy, Thursday, Palm Sunday, or Good Friday. I want, like, you are in charge of it. This is what I want to do if I had the freedom to make all these decisions.
Ellen, I sent you mine last week, and I know you received it. I asked you to take a look at it. Yeah.
Oh, I will look when we get done. I don't remember. I haven't seen that one, but it may have come early and I lost it.
It came early because I mentioned it last week during our session
Okay.
here about.
Me as
All
well, Ellen. I turned mine in last week too. I emailed it to you and I posted it on the
Okay,
page.
I will look and see because I
If you
didn't.
can't find it, please shoot me an email. I'll send it.
I'll let you know and let y'all resend that to me.
Perfect. Thank you.
That would be good. Thank you very much. All right then. So today we are talking about the Eucharist. And I normally in this class do the Eucharist before I do Holy Week, but I thought with Holy Week coming so early, I would just do Holy Week first. So if any of you were in any position to plan anything or contribute to planning, you might be able to do that. So we're going to start on page 355 of the Book of Common Prayer. Now, do most of you do Rite 2 at your places?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, good. Well, notice that if you go back a couple of pages to the penitential order, how many of you are doing that during Lent? Okay, good. Yeah. All right, that's good. Note that it says, for the use at the beginning of the liturgy or as a separate service. So if you maybe had a Wednesday noon thing that you did during Lent, you might want to do just the penitential order because it has the confession. You can also do all of the 10 commandments if you want, and there's a response. That response can be sung as well. But if you do that after the absolution, then you just move on with the song of praise. But I wanted to mention that to you. So notice in your prayer book that it just says the word of God, a hymn, psalm, or anthem may be sung. So it doesn't say anything about how you get in or anything. And it says, what is that rubric? A hymn, psalm, or anthem may be sung?
Permissive.
Permissive rubric. So you don't have to do anything. You could just, like magic, everybody could just appear and then you say, blessed be God. However, our tradition, we love to have, Episcopalians love to have a parade. And so having some sort of processional hymn, which is the norm. We've talked that in Lent, though, that whole entrance rite could be shaken up a bit. So you as presiders or planners can show different seasons by how you do the entrance rite. Since the prayer book doesn't say much of anything about it, it just assumes that the presider is standing up there and starts with the opening acclamation, whether it's Lent, ordinary time, or Easter or Advent. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So let's talk about this entrance rite just a little bit. What are some of our options? Obviously, during the Easter season, you want it to be big and Easter hymns and bring all the stuff in. If you have torches, banners, anything.
Hallelujahs.
Pardon?
Hallelujahs.
That's right. And just bring in all the stuff. If you've got incense, if your parish likes to have incense, I'd be swinging some smoke all during Easter. And just to emphasize that this is the biggest part of the year. Once you get to ordinary time, things scale back just a little bit, particularly as we're going into the summer, people start going away. But having a big blowout as your entrance rite during the Easter season is a good thing to do. We've talked about Advent being a more inward season, not particularly penitential, but more inward. So after you've had these 79 Sundays after Pentecost, and it's time for Advent, the beginning of the new liturgical year, thinking about a way to teach Advent and to show it liturgically, what you can do that with changing up your entrance rite. So that maybe you don't, you come into something else. At the parishes I've served, we would do the opening acclamation and call it for purity. The presider would be at the back of the church, and then we would process in. The choir and the altar people would process into the song of praise. We would do selected verses of O Come, Emmanuel, maybe 3 stanzas during Advent, changing those stanzas as we get deeper into the season. But thinking about how you can teach that, oh, this isn't just same old, this is a new season. Same way with Lent. We've talked about Lent coming in from the side, not having a procession as such. Shaking it up just a little bit, because that's a really good teaching tool for your congregations, that this is a whole different season.
Ellen,
Yeah, sure, Harry.
I don't know exactly how to ask the question. Maybe what's the best way to educate, to teach? I mean, you want to do it on Sunday morning because that's when the vast majority of people come. You could talk about it at a Bible discussion or study and say, this Sunday we're going to do this because. But I mean, we at one church I'm serving at now, we start the church 10 minutes prior with announcements before we get into that prelude and the service. So perhaps then this morning we're going to do this a little different. I don't know.
At the beginning of the season, you want to do it not just one way, because people learn in different ways. So I would start, if you have a newsletter.
Or the bulletin, maybe.
Well, yeah, or if you have a newsletter that goes out to the congregation, even if it's once a month, to talk about this. The season upcoming is Lent. The beginning of the service may look a little different because we're doing this. And then before the service starts, if at your announcement time, if you have something like potluck suppers, that's a great time to do that kind of thing. Sing a few hymns that people love and then do a little teaching. Do it at your Christian formation time. You want to find those opportunities to teach and not just let it appear out of, where people are confused about things. What you don't want are people to be anxious during liturgies. That's the worst thing that can happen. And so if they know what's coming up, they're in better shape and they're able to worship then and not be thinking, why is this so different? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that multiple prong approach rather.
There's not just one way of doing it. So you have to look and using who you have there, how your parish does things. That's when you figure out how to do the teaching. But not just one way, but in 2 or 3 different ways. And to present it in a positive way. I think we talked about liturgical change right at the beginning. And, anytime you're going to change something, give them a start date and an ending date. So for Lent this year, we're going to pare down. We're not going to have a procession. The clergy and altar party will come in from the side. We're doing this. It's a new season. It's penitential. And just to tell people what you're doing and why it's important to do it. If that makes sense to you. So the first part, and we're going to take two times to talk about the Eucharist. So we'll take little parts at a time. The first part of the celebration of the Holy Eucharist is the liturgy of the Word of God. There are 4 actions in this part of the liturgy: the gathering, which is what we've been talking about, the gathering rite, the entrance rite, listening, sharing, and praying. Sharing the peace, praying the prayers of the people, listening to the homily, listening to the word. Tell me what you all think is the purpose, for those of you who have an organist, what is the purpose of the prelude?
To sort of set the tone and to kind of, a lot of people want to take a moment to be still, and it almost gives them an excuse to turn away and not to have conversations and to sit down and listen and
yes,
be still.
exactly.
Doesn't work that way in my parish, but yeah.
But you know, no,
It
I
gives
agree.
them an excuse to talk more loudly. Yes. Yeah.
I agree, Tim. I mean, you have to stand, everybody hears the music. It creates that, okay, you're all chatting through the 15 minutes of the candles being lit. So here's the moment, like
Have a lot of candles.
yeah. We use the oil-based candles. Usually we light them 10 or 15 minutes before, because if you don't, people are chatting right up until, when we have that. It's kind of like I don't know if it's a rule, but we have kind of a rule in our church. Once the candles are lit, everybody should not be chit-chatting. So
That's
it
what
doesn't really-
chit-chatting is for coffee hour following the service.
right. We can chit chat, but once the acolyte lights the candles, then everybody should be quiet. But it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah.
Well, but
We-
Tim's right. The prelude is to set the tone and to let people kind of take a breath and
Right.
sit there, think about why they're there. They actually may be thinking about what they're cooking for dinner, for Sunday lunch, or where they're going to brunch. But it's to set the tone for the service. So then, what is the purpose of the opening hymn?
I'm sorry, I screwed that up. The opening hymn is to get everybody to pay attention, and
Oh.
and to announce. I screwed that up. I'm sorry. I
Okay.
meant opening hymn when you said prelude.
Okay.
No.
So what's the purpose of the opening hymn?
Well, it's to get everybody. Here we are.
I-
This, we're starting. This is the beginning. Everybody stand up, pay attention. We're gonna worship.
You gather together and actually, as one
Right.
community, you sing together.
I like the unity thing.
Yes, you become a community at that opening hymn. Everybody comes in. Sometimes the traffic's been bad, or they've been wrestling 5 children trying to get them all dressed for church. People are in a different space. Everybody's in a different space when they walk into the building. The prelude gives them time to breathe for a second, say their prayers if they want to have some private prayer. And then that opening hymn is to make everybody one community. It's a we thing, not an I thing. We will stand up. So what does that tell you about, and we'll talk about this further in a few weeks, but what does that tell you about the opening hymn? What should that be like?
Exciting,
Joyous.
joy.
We use it for the procession. We do the
Yes.
prelude. We do the announcements, prelude, everybody's quiet, then we do the opening hymn for a procession. It's
Mhm.
kind of like, when I was a little kid, I would say, oh, well, God's coming in the house. So, and I think when I talk to some of the youth, they still think that way. Okay, it's,
But what kind of hymn should it be? Joyful, yes.
Uplifting.
Familiar that
uplifting,
everybody can sing.
joyful.
Say, who just said that?
Uplifting.
What did you just say?
Me?
Yes.
I said something familiar that everybody can sing.
Yes, that's what I'm looking for. This is not the time to have a brand new hymn. Yeah, I can tell you, and we'll talk about hymns and all that in a couple of weeks, but I can tell you that nobody is coming to church and saying, well, Maud, I hope we learn a new hymn today. So that first hymn needs to be something people know. And hopefully your musicians have been around or have talked to enough people to know what everybody knows, because that canon of hymnody is different in every congregation. I went out to the Diocese of Nevada several years ago to do some workshops out there. And so I asked the person who was meeting me and taking me around, said, well, just give me the top 10 hymns in this diocese, because I figured coming from the Deep South, they're going to be way different. So he sent me a list of hymns, and I'm looking at this going, seriously? These are the top 10 hymns in your diocese? Because it's not anything like what I would have said the top 10 hymns in the diocese where I was at the time. So it should be something that people can know and sing. And the same thing goes for the hymn at the end. Nobody goes out whistling the sermon, I'm here to tell you. So it needs to be a hymn. There are plenty of places to have new hymns, and I am a big proponent of teaching new hymns to congregations. But at the beginning and at the end, those should be the hymns that people know and can almost sing without looking at a hymnal. And they're different for every place. So that opening hymn, its purpose is to unify the congregation so we can say we, Does that make sense? So after we've gotten everybody in and we have an acclamation, and notice there are three. One is one most of us use during ordinary time. Blessed be God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Notice it says, the next one says, in place of the above, from Easter Day through the day of Pentecost. So that's a directive rubric, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's when you use the Alleluia, Christ is risen. Then it says in Lent and on other penitential occasions, you can start with bless the Lord who forgives all our sins. His mercy endures forever. I'm hoping that I'm not sure if the prayer book's ever going to be revised. I don't think it really will be. I think there'll be something else, but I would love to see acclamations for Advent, an acclamation for All Saints, different acclamations for different occasions in the church. But right now, this is what we've got. Then notice it says the celebrant, and I prefer the word presider than celebrant because I feel like we all are celebrants. So I do prefer the word presider, but prayer book does say celebrant, may say the collect for purity. Now, I've been in parishes where everybody says that. That's not what the prayer book says. It says the celebrant may say it.
But if
But
we're all celebrants,
pardon?
but if we're all celebrants,
Well, I know. There's really nothing that says you can't do it, but I've never understood the point.
our church says, and people in
Okay.
our bulletin, they do say that.
All right.
This one says the celebrant, whether priest or bishop, so.
But if, that would not be a ditch I'd want to die in, that's for sure. But that is optional. You do not have to use that. Notice it's a permissive rubric. It may. And then it comes when appointed the following hymn, and one of my favorite phrases in the prayer book, or some other song of praise is sung or said all standing. Now, I will admit my prejudice. I'm not a big fan of Glorias. I feel like they go on too long. So I tend to like that some other song of praise rather than the Gloria or the Kyrie or the Trisagion, everything on page 356. But you can do what you want. I think that could be a good time. And I will put this online. I have a whole thing of hymns that could be used in place of the Gloria. And I will put that on the website because I think there are a lot of things you can do there. But if you're a big Gloria person, go for it because that's, so let me talk just a little bit about service music. I hope that I hope that your parish is now, and that when you are in charge of a parish, that you don't do the same set of service music until the return of Jesus. And I'm serious about that. I think every congregation should at least have three sets, and they don't all have to be, you don't have to use everything from one mass setting. But if you're into Glorias, I would say have three that you can do. One for festive times, one for Lent, and one for ordinary time. The same thing with a Sanctus or a fraction anthem. Not to do the very same ones. It becomes too rote-like and people aren't really engaging if they are singing the same Sanctus. Now you need to have, especially if you're teaching a new one, like any other liturgical change, a start date and an end date. But have it for a season. And I have many times during ordinary time, since it goes on for so long, after Easter, I'll change things up, after, I may do one for the summer and then one starting in the fall, something different. I may keep the same Sanctus, but use a different fraction anthem. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
But to
Mhm.
have more than one that you can do is a helpful thing to do. What about at your places? Does everybody do you rotate some different service? Mass setting?
We have a lot of seasonal variation, and it's funny because we don't usually use a mass setting. And it was funny, I kind of, because of a musical background, I kind of like the idea of using one unified set from time to time, and for certain occasions, for sure.
Yeah. I have heard lots of people argue about, oh, you should always do a complete mass setting or pick and choose. I'm more of the pick and choose kind. I have nothing against doing a whole mass setting, but sometimes I don't like one part of the mass.
Oh, right. And it's interesting though, like we usually do a little bit of picking and choosing. And I think we had a guest organist at one point last summer, and he said, this is just such a pastiche of this and that. And they're like, well, it's not up to you to change things today.
No, that you are completely right about that. But yeah, having at least two that you can put in there every now and then. So what we come to next is the collect of the day. Who knows what the purpose of that is? Has anybody ever written a collect?
Yes. Mhm. It kind of collects the prayers that are associated with the day. I mean, sometimes with the lectionary, the theme for the day.
Yes. Kind of introduces, says this is what we're about today. And collects have a form. And if you look in the prayer book in the section where they have all the collects, you'll notice that they all stick to a certain form. You might want to look through some of those. It's a great thing to do with kids, to have them write a collect. You tell them, okay, first we're going to address God, and have them do that. And then it's an interesting activity to do with kids. They tend to learn a lot more and know a lot more than their parents do. All right, so if you're using 3 readings, now notice the rubric says 1 or 2 lessons as appointed are read, but you always have to do the gospel. Do any of you not do all 3? Anybody just do 2?
We do all 3.
On a Sunday?
I lied. I didn't mean to raise my hand.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
And-
I would say that worked at a parish at one point, and we only did 2.
When
did
we,
the
oh,
Old
sorry.
Testament and the Gospel, Old Testament, Psalm, and Gospel.
When we were first coming back in person after COVID to, I think, tighten the service up a bit, there were fewer lessons read, but they've since been integrated back in.
Yeah, that most places where I've been do, unless you've got a time crunch, let's say if you have an early service and a late service and you've got to be done at a certain amount of time, or if you're on television and you have to be done at a certain amount of time, people will sometimes shorten that and do just the Old Testament or just the epistle, and then with the gospel. So, but if you're using all three, the first comes from the Hebrew scriptures. The second is one of the letters in the New Testament. These are read by lay people. They don't have to be licensed lay readers. I don't even know if there's licensing for lay readers anymore anyway. But it's important that they be read by people who can read well. I can't stress the importance of lecture training. Having someone who knows how to use their voice, and I have no problem requiring, if someone wants to be a reader, that they must go to a training. It doesn't have to be long, but I think for what happens is people tend to read too quickly. And if you think you're reading too slowly, you're probably doing it just right. But have you heard people read lessons, reading scripture like they're reading the phone book?
Very
pretty
monotone.
It's pretty boring.
It-
So
it-
having some animation in your voice and to have a lecture training, even if you can get, if there's an actor in your town who can talk about the use of the voice, or have your musician, if your musician's a singer, to talk about how to project your voice without, and to pause. As you know, some of those letters of Paul are like reading a William Faulkner novel. It's got so many clauses here, and if you don't pause, it makes absolutely no sense at all. So having readers who are trained and know how to do it is a good thing to do. It's no less important than the priest doing the Eucharistic prayer and doing that in a way that's meaningful.
It's interesting. We have a person that's kind of in charge of scheduling lectures,
Uh-huh.
and they've put out guidance in the past that almost discouraged acting during, the reading. But then again, and I guess you don't want to take it too far,
Right.
but you do want to bring something to it, and something that livens it up a bit.
I agree with that.
Yeah, we had a priest that agreed with what Tim said, that they did not want us acting the role. They didn't want us to put too much into it. And I get it. I mean, it's not a Broadway show.
Well, but also part of it is it's not only your interpretation as the lector. You're to bring something to it, but I think the people hearing it need to be able to have some room for interpretation as well.
Well, but I'm talking about things like if there's a question in the reading,
Oh,
I've
sure.
heard people just kind of go, nah, 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 and not using their voice like at the end of a question where your voice comes
inflection.
up a bit,
Yeah.
and I don't think you want someone to emote, but you want somebody to read. What I hate more than anything, I wish our readers were good enough that we didn't have to print the readings in the service leaflet, because there's a real difference in hearing the word and just reading along with the word. I try not, when I go to church, I don't follow along. I want to listen to it. And that's,
I like that, but I also there are people who it's a visual thing too.
I agree with
And-
that.
And when I read, I want to hear it and read it. It helps me to read it aloud, while I'm reading a lot of times.
Mhm.
Ellen, have you ever looked at and went, oh no, not Paul? Like, I mean, when you've had to read with all the colons, semicolons, commas, he is so hard to read aloud, but I'd love to read him silently.
Well, you have to practice it. You want your readers to not read it for the first time when they show up when they walk up to the lectern to read. It's important that people practice it because it's different. Reading it out loud is different than just reading it to yourself.
We've been doing a thing where we're calling people out of the congregation to do the reading. it's something new. There's like a list of people, but
Mm-hmm.
it's
Sure.
it's a new it looks nice. It really does. It's very inclusive.
It should be lay people coming out of the congregation. That's a powerful symbol.
It has changed the mood in the church considerably.
Good. So following the lesson from Hebrew scriptures, we have a psalm, sometimes called a gradual psalm, because it was usually led by a cantor singing from the steps that went to the ambo or the lectern. The psalm is a response to the Old Testament reading. You know, the Psalms were our first hymnal and should be sung. They should be sung. How many of you sing the Psalms? Good, good.
Our choir sings them, we don't.
Do you do a responsorial psalm where you have a response and they?
They just sing the entire psalm.
Okay.
We listen to the choir sing them. We don't, I mean, it's been doing that way now through Lent. They may change it back where I mean, they do change it around sometimes, but right now the choir sings it.
Well, we're going to do a session later on about singing psalms because I think it's very important.
We do a
The
couple different
congregation.
variations where we
Yeah.
have sometimes a cantor and a response.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's a choral Anglican chant.
So many
It-
different ways. So we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. Obviously the gospel holds the place of honor here and is read by the deacon or by the priest if there is no deacon. Sometimes we sing a hymn as the gospel procession makes its way to the center of the nave, and that hymn should speak to the gospel theme. Now, there's been discussion I've heard over the years whether the hymn before the gospel should reflect what they've already heard or should sort of show what they're going to hear. And a lot of that depends on the readings. Sometimes there are no hymns that go with the gospel. I can tell you that. We should, we stand as the procession makes its way into the midst of the congregation. It can be accompanied by the cross and torches, as well as some incense if your congregation is used to it. Sometimes your organist will play what I call a little traveling music to get everybody back there. I had a priest say one time that the congregation should not hear anything between when the gospel is read to when the sermon is preached on the gospel. I think that unless you are at, the National Cathedral or the Cathedral of St. John the Divine with a huge long center aisle, there doesn't need to be music to get you back. No, we don't have enough silence in church, I don't think. I like to have silence after each of the readings. If you're doing it, though, please note that in your service leaflet so people aren't looking around thinking, who forgot to do something?
We use traveling music.
Do you really?
Yeah.
We actually
So-
sing something usually.
What I want to tell you not to do is don't split up your hymn. Don't sing 3 stanzas of a hymn and then have the gospel and then the last 2 stanzas. That's like taking a piece of poetry in your hymn, taking a piece of poetry and saying, oh, wait, stop in the middle of it and let me tell you the story. And then we'll finish the piece of poetry. That makes absolutely no sense to me.
I've never seen that.
Oh,
I've
it's
seen-
very,
it's weird. Yeah.
very common.
Really? I've
Oh,
never even heard that.
No.
Well-
One church I served in, you did 2 verses. The deacon priest read the gospel, 2 verses, once in the
Don't do
pulpit.
it.
Yeah, no.
Don't do it. It's a horrible practice because it really does interrupt the
I'll have to
poetry of
share
the
that.
hymn. But it's very common. I've seen it in lots of places. So I will tell you, do not do it. Lord, I'm running short of time. I want to talk about the lectionary. All right, let me talk about the lectionary. Are you all familiar with the lectionary page online?
Yes.
Yeah, that's where we all get our readings from now. I'm terrible at sharing my screen. Let me see if I can figure out how to do this, because I pulled it up and where did it go? Microsoft Word.
If you
Why
go,
can
if you go to the bottom, it says share screen.
Yeah, I did that. I'm looking at it where I want to share it. I'm just trying to find the screen I want to share.
Oh, okay.
Lord, that just irritates me. I have never been good at sharing my screen because I never can find what I'm looking for. Let's see. Okay, well, I'm not going to spend any more time on that because I'm wasting time. But so let's just talk about the 3-year lectionary cycle.
A, B, and C.
We have A, B, and C. And we are in year, what are we
B.
in right? B.
B.
So those are the Gospels of Mark. A are usually Gospels of Matthew. B are Mark. C are Luke. And then John is sprinkled in there in different parts. When we get to ordinary time, where if you look on the lectionary page, they will have 2 tracks, right? They'll have the semi-continuous track and they have the gospel related track. Who knows what those mean?
Semi-continuous is actually in order.
Right. Yes. So the Old Testament reading, they just start with a book and go, they go through it. I'm not a fan, but at any rate, I've worked for people who are fans. So, the rector is always right there. The gospel related they have the Old Testament reading and the gospel lessons are related. Sometimes that applies to the epistle reading, but not always. The Psalm is a response to the Old Testament reading.
Reading.
And then those two are related. The gospel and the Old Testament readings are related if you use that track. Track 1, semi-continuous, track 2. Now, you have to pick one. When it comes to ordinary time, you don't say, oh, well, this week we're going to do semi-continuous, and then next week we're going to use gospel related. You pick one and you stick with it for the rest of the year. Does that make sense? Because then if you were picking the semi-continuous one, you're not continuous anymore with reading the Old Testament stories. And that's what I usually hear from clergy about why they like the semi-continuous, because as secular as our world has become, and kids aren't always in Sunday school, we don't get all of those wonderful Old Testament stories. So, but you don't pick. I've had students say, well, last week we did the gospel related one, but this time we like this better, so we're going to do it. That's not the way it works. You pick one and you stick with it from Trinity Sunday to the end of the year until Advent.
In our diocese, we get it every week. We go on the lectionary. It's on the diocese website, has all the scriptures we are to use. So I guess it's semi-continuous.
I'm sure that it's probably from the lectionary page. I mean, but if you can go to the lectionary page and it has all the scriptures for
we also get the collect. It's part of it. Yeah.
That's what the lectionary page has as well. It has the collect. You're not familiar with it, pull it up, and there's all sorts of resources there for lesser feast and fast, for the 2-year lectionary cycle. There's a 2-year one, and for daily office too. Oh goodness, I'm really running late. Any questions about the lectionary? Okay. We're almost done then. Then the sermon follows. The sermon is not optional. It just says in the prayer book, the sermon. So there should be a sermon there. And it should basically be on the gospel reading of the day. I know a lot of clergy sometimes preach on the Old Testament reading or the New Testament reading, but it's traditional to do that. Following the sermon, and I like having a little silence after the sermon so people can reflect a little bit, put it in the bulletin, put it in your service leaflet if you're going to have that. Then the creed comes and is said by all. This is a theological statement. It is always said on Sundays, but it can be omitted at certain times. No, remember, on Palm Sunday, they tell you can omit the creed. You might want to think about singing the creed for a season. It could just be monotoned, or there are some settings in the hymnals. There is a setting of the Apostles' Creed in Wonder, Love, and Praise, but that is not a substitute for the Nicene Creed. But there are some settings. I've not been at many places that sing this. Everybody should be able to enter into that. Then we come to the prayers of the people, which is a fitting response for the readings. They can be read from the midst of the congregation or from the lectern. They must be heard by the congregation. I have seen parishes that have someone come and do it from the center aisle, but they don't have any a microphone, so people can't hear them. It's so important. I'd rather somebody come up to the lectern where there's a mic than do it from the center of the congregation and not be heard. Why do you think we do this from the center of the congregation?
So it's about the people.
Right. These are the prayers from the congregation. But if you don't have a handheld mic, and if you're at a place that people can't hear, it's more important that people hear those prayers and can pray along than it is for the symbolism from from within the congregation. I think I mentioned that the prayers of the people that are in the prayer book were given there as examples of different types of prayer. They weren't meant to just do these. There are lots of places, lots of resources for prayers, and I will put some of those on the bulletin board. Be sure, some of these, like you'll see silence. For instance, in prayer 2, it will have silence. This does not mean a 1-second silence. There should be a silence after any petition. It should be 6 or 7 seconds before going on. If you have someone in your congregation who's a good writer, having someone write prayers, or if you have an EFM group, or you might have kids do it, if you got someone else. But these should be the prayers of your congregation. And I wouldn't do the same form until Jesus returns. Change those up. Find someone, and I'll give you some examples, but if you can have someone write those prayers each week that speak to things going on in your congregation, that's an important thing, don't you think?
It can be.
Have the prayers. Use different, and if you're only going to use the ones in the prayer book, do different ones. Don't always use Form 6, which gets done a whole lot. And people like it because it has the confession at the end of it. But try to find different prayers, and there are lots of resources, and I'll send you some, that relate to the gospel reading, that relate to all the readings. So doing those, doing something that's a little bit different, or write your own, and using the forms in the prayer book. If you want to use one of those, just do things that are important to your congregation. You will notice that in our prayer book, prayer is offered with intercession for the universal church, the nation, the welfare of the world, concerns of the local community, those who suffer and those in any trouble, and the departed. So you can do those, you can cover those topics, and you don't have to use just the ones in the prayer book. As we said last week, the confession is not used during the Great 50 Days. That is omitted during the Easter season. I see a chat. Let's see here. What is this?
I just put the lectionary page link.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Since I'm going to learn how to share my screen one of these days. But the confession is omitted. And then we have the peace. Some people feel like it's the 7th inning stretch. Everybody kind of gets up and asks folks where they're going to brunch. And, how about those, those Eagles last night, or what do you think the football team's going to do? Have y'all heard this? I mean, people just sit and chat. It's like a cocktail party. And that's not what the peace is. The peace is sort of a hinge from the liturgy of the word to the Holy Communion. My husband went to a conference at Canoga, North Carolina several years ago, where Desmond Tutu was the speaker. And he was saying that in the peace, we shouldn't be talking to each other. We shouldn't be shaking hands. And I think a lot of that went away during COVID. But we should genuflect to each other, because what we're doing in the peace, saying, and if any of you are do yoga, the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. That's what a namaste is. And that should be, and we did that in my choir. We decided after COVID, we weren't doing hugs and all that stuff. And we just put our hands together and bowed to each other as acknowledging the Christ in you. The Christ in me acknowledges the Christ in you. It's hard to get congregations out of that. The last congregation where I was, oh Lord, the peace took forever, because everybody had to walk around. And that's really not what the peace is supposed to be about. You're supposed to just stay to the person maybe in front of you, behind you, next to you, but not walking around. That's for coffee hour following the service.
I believe, Ron, correct me if I'm wrong, that our bishop tends to go up the aisle, the sign of peace.
He does, well, the bishop does, and usually the priest, but not all the people do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the bishop does, definitely.
In our church, the priest does, and whoever his server on the altar with him will walk. They usually walk side by side, and they kind of do this thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. So anyway, that's the first half of the liturgy. Any questions about that? I feel like I've covered this quickly. Any questions about the lectionary? I'll get all the gospel related and the semi-continuous. I'm sorry Patrick's not here, because he specifically asked me about that on our first time, I think.
Seems like a lot of educational opportunities. I mean, it's just, it won't happen for years. I mean, to take the peace away from them, the gospel hymn, it's just interesting.
Yes, you have to decide what ditch is worth dying in. And I had a friend who taught at seminary who said the only thing that is non-negotiable is Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. So, you have to figure out when you're teaching, what you can let go of and what is important, what's important for
Right.
your congregation.
It's also a pastoral connotation, like what would be best and what would not be so good.
Right.
A lot to think about and pray about, in my opinion. I'm sorry, I just went off on my own head.
No, that's good. If you are on Facebook, you might be interested in joining a group called Prayer Book Revision. I think you have to request to join and they'll let you in, but there's some interesting things in there. And Juan Oliver, who wrote A House of Meanings and is the fairly lately retired custodian of the prayer book, he is writing a series of articles right now about the church. And with dwindling attendance, what needs to happen. I've read 2 or 3 of them now, but he writes so well and he's such a good thinker. If that's an interesting group to be a part of, the prayer book revision and whatever. I think that if you just put in prayer book revision, it'll come up, and just request to join because there's some interesting things in there, interesting discussions about the prayer book. Anything else?
I resent my assignment, so you have it
Thank you.
again. Make a
Thank you. I'll
statement
look through
digging for it,
mine.
yeah.
I get inundated with emails and
I'm sure,
political
so
emails.
to dig for that would be probably an eternity, so I can just did it again.
All right, thank you. All right, there's a discussion topic that will be live. I want to hear how you would get an Easter vigil going when you are the rector or in charge of liturgical planning. We will not meet next week, so I hope everyone has a meaningful and wonderful Holy Week and Easter Day, and I will see you right after Easter.
April 2nd.
April the 2nd. Golly, how did it get to be April already?
Seems so far, doesn't it?
I know, and it's kind of chilly here again now. It had been so lovely. Now it's cold again, but it's always cold around Easter, I guess. You all have a lovely week. I will see you in 2 weeks.
Happy
If
Easter.
you have any questions
Happy
about
Easter.
anything, please shoot me an email.
When is the assignment due? Next week, or is it due the following?
2 weeks. 2 weeks.
Okay.
The discussion topic, yes. I hope you will engage with each other on that.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.